The transport shuttle's landing thrusters kicked up a cloud of crimson dust that painted the viewport in shades of rust and copper. Commander Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the reinforced glass, watching the swirling particles dance in the alien atmosphere like microscopic ballerinas having a very bad day. Kepler 442b stretched endlessly before her, a world of rolling hills and crystalline formations that caught the light of its twin suns and threw it back in spectacular rainbows that would have made Earth's aurora borealis weep with envy. "Well, that's definitely not Kansas," she muttered, adjusting her uniform jacket for what felt like the 100th time during the 6-hour flight. The fabric kept bunching up around her shoulders, a reminder that regulation clothing wasn't designed for someone who spent most of her time hunched over tactical displays rather than standing at attention for diplomatic ceremonies. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom with the enthusiasm of someone reading grocery lists. "Research Station Gamma 7 coming into view, Commander. Local time is 1437, atmospheric pressure is holding steady at .95 standard, and the coffee in the station commissary is reportedly terrible." Elena snorted. "Thanks for that crucial intelligence briefing, Morrison. Just keeping you informed about the important stuff, ma'am." The research station squatted on the landscape like a metallic spider, its hexagonal modules connected by flexible corridors that swayed gently in the planet's persistent breeze. Solar collectors tracked the movement of the twin suns with mechanical precision, while atmospheric processors hummed in the distance, working tirelessly to maintain the delicate balance that kept humans breathing without life support gear. As the shuttle touched down with a soft thud that suggested the landing pad had seen better decades, Elena caught her first glimpse of the delegation waiting near the station's main airlock. 3 figures stood in perfect formation, their posture so rigid they might have been carved from the same crystalline material that dotted the planet's surface. Even at this distance, she could see they weren't entirely human. The ears gave it away, elongated and gracefully pointed, they moved with subtle expressions that human ears simply couldn't manage. Elena had studied the briefing materials until her eyes bled, but seeing Etherians in person was like the difference between reading about waterfalls and standing under Niagara. She gathered her diplomatic satchel, checked her translator unit for the 5th time, and stepped off the shuttle into air that tasted faintly of ozone and possibility. The gravity was lighter here, making each step feel like a small bounce, and she had to consciously avoid looking like she was skipping to her first day of intergalactic kindergarten. The Etherian delegation approached with movements so synchronized they might have been choreographed. The figure in the center, clearly the leader based on the way the other 2 flanked her like particularly elegant bodyguards, wore robes that seemed to shift color with each step, cycling through blues and purples that had no names in any human language. The transport shuttle's landing thrusters kicked up a cloud of crimson dust that painted the viewport in shades of rust and copper. Commander Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the reinforced glass, watching the swirling particles dance in the alien atmosphere like microscopic ballerinas having a very bad day. Kepler 442b stretched endlessly before her, a world of rolling hills and crystalline formations that caught the light of its twin suns and threw it back in spectacular rainbows that would have made Earth's aurora borealis weep with envy. "Well, that's definitely not Kansas," she muttered, adjusting her uniform jacket for what felt like the 100th time during the 6-hour flight. The fabric kept bunching up around her shoulders, a reminder that regulation clothing wasn't designed for someone who spent most of her time hunched over tactical displays rather than standing at attention for diplomatic ceremonies. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom with the enthusiasm of someone reading grocery lists. "Research Station Gamma 7 coming into view, Commander. Local time is 1437, atmospheric pressure is holding steady at .95 standard, and the coffee in the station commissary is reportedly terrible." Elena snorted. "Thanks for that crucial intelligence briefing, Morrison. Just keeping you informed about the important stuff, ma'am." The research station squatted on the landscape like a metallic spider, its hexagonal modules connected by flexible corridors that swayed gently in the planet's persistent breeze. Solar collectors tracked the movement of the twin suns with mechanical precision, while atmospheric processors hummed in the distance, working tirelessly to maintain the delicate balance that kept humans breathing without life support gear. As the shuttle touched down with a soft thud that suggested the landing pad had seen better decades, Elena caught her first glimpse of the delegation waiting near the station's main airlock. 3 figures stood in perfect formation, their posture so rigid they might have been carved from the same crystalline material that dotted the planet's surface. Even at this distance, she could see they weren't entirely human. The ears gave it away, elongated and gracefully pointed, they moved with subtle expressions that human ears simply couldn't manage. Elena had studied the briefing materials until her eyes bled, but seeing Etherians in person was like the difference between reading about waterfalls and standing under Niagara. She gathered her diplomatic satchel, checked her translator unit for the 5th time, and stepped off the shuttle into air that tasted faintly of ozone and possibility. The gravity was lighter here, making each step feel like a small bounce, and she had to consciously avoid looking like she was skipping to her first day of intergalactic kindergarten. The Etherian delegation approached with movements so synchronized they might have been choreographed. The figure in the center, clearly the leader based on the way the other 2 flanked her like particularly elegant bodyguards, wore robes that seemed to shift color with each step, cycling through blues and purples that had no names in any human language. Those distinctive ears twitched once as Elena approached, a gesture so subtle she almost missed it. The woman's face could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and classical beauty that suggested aristocracy going back several geological eras. Her violet eyes tracked Elena's movement with the intensity of a targeting system, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that made starship captains reconsider their career choices. "Commander Vasquez, I presume. I am Princess Lyralii of the Etherian Empire, 3rd daughter of the Celestial Throne, guardian of the outer reaches, and," she paused, her ears shifting almost imperceptibly, deeply disappointed by the primitive accommodations we've been forced to endure. Elena bit back her first 3 responses, all of which would have probably started an interstellar incident. Instead, she managed what she hoped was a diplomatic smile. "Your Highness, it's an honor to meet you. I hope the journey wasn't too uncomfortable. Our ship's environmental systems were calibrated for beings with properly proportioned auditory appendages," Lyralii replied, one elegant hand gesturing vaguely toward her own ears. The atmospheric recycling created a harmonic frequency that was, most unpleasant. "I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe we can adjust the station's systems to better accommodate." "Unnecessary. We adapt to circumstances, Commander, we do not expect circumstances to adapt to us." The princess's tone could have flash-frozen a supernova. Elena nodded, mentally filing away the information that Etherians apparently had superhuman hearing along with their distinctive ear structure. She gestured toward the station's entrance. "Shall we head inside? I understand you've had a long journey." The walk to the conference room provided Elena with her first real look at Etherian physiology in motion. Princess Lyralii moved with a grace that suggested either extensive training in classical dance or a skeletal structure that defied several laws of physics. Her companions, introduced briefly as Captain Loren and Scholar Vexia, followed at precisely measured distances, their own movements equally fluid. The research station's corridors, designed with human comfort in mind, suddenly felt cramped and pedestrian. The ceiling panels hummed with their usual electrical symphony, punctuated by the occasional beep from environmental monitors that Elena had long since learned to ignore. Today, however, every mechanical sound seemed amplified, and she noticed how the Etherian's ears tracked each noise with precision that bordered on the supernatural. The conference room was a testament to bureaucratic functionality over aesthetic appeal. A single table dominated the space, surrounded by chairs that had been designed by someone who clearly believed comfort was a character flaw. Wall screens displayed star charts and planetary data in fonts so small they required either exceptional eyesight or a complete lack of concern for human readability. Elena moved toward the table, reaching for her data pad to begin the formal proceedings. The device had been loaded with cultural exchange protocols, trade agreements, and enough diplomatic language to fill a small library. As she extended her arm, her elbow brushed against Princess Lyralii's shoulder, the briefest contact, hardly more than a whisper of fabric against fabric. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Lyraliai's hand shot up between them, her fingers spread in a gesture that was unmistakably defensive. Her violet eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, surprise, or possibly both. When she spoke, her voice cut through the recycled air like a plasma cutter through titanium. "Touch me again, human, and you'll suffer the consequences." The words hung in the air between them, charged with implications that Elena's diplomatic training hadn't quite prepared her for. Captain Aloran and Scholar Vexia remained perfectly still, their expressions unreadable but their posture suggesting they were ready to either flee or fight, depending on how the next few seconds played out. Elena raised her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression, her data pad forgotten. "Your Highness, I apologize. I didn't mean to." That was when the station's environmental system chose to contribute its own commentary to the tense situation. A series of mechanical beeps echoed through the room, followed by a cheerful electronic warble that sounded remarkably like laughter. The atmospheric recycling unit hummed louder for a moment, then settled back into its normal rhythm with what could only be described as a satisfied sigh. Elena stared at the ceiling, wondering if the station's AI had developed a sense of humor or if she was finally losing her mind after too many years in space. Princess Lyraliai's ears twitched, a movement so quick Elena almost missed it, and for just a moment, the marble perfection of her expression showed the tiniest crack. "Your machinery appears to be malfunctioning," the princess observed, her voice slightly less arctic than before. "Oh, that's just the life support systems letting us know everything's working properly," Elena replied, grateful for the distraction. "The engineers thought it would be less stressful than alarm sounds." "Less stressful," Lyraliai repeated, her tone suggesting she found human psychology fascinating in the way one might find a particularly bizarre alien parasite fascinating. "Well, debatable," Elena admitted. "Sometimes I think the beeping is plotting against me. For a heartbeat, or whatever the Etherian equivalent might be, something that might have been amusement flickered across the princess's features. Then the diplomatic mask slammed back into place, leaving Elena wondering if she'd imagined the whole thing. "Perhaps we should proceed with the cultural exchange protocols," Princess Lyraliai said, settling into her chair with movements that suggested she had never in her life encountered furniture that wasn't custom designed for royalty. "I trust you have prepared appropriate documentation regarding human customs and technological capabilities." Elena nodded, finally retrieving her data pad and trying not to think about how the brief contact had felt like touching a live wire. "Absolutely, Your Highness. We've prepared comprehensive materials covering everything from basic social interactions to advanced quantum mechanics. Though I should warn you, some of our customs might seem unusual. I am prepared for primitive behaviors, Commander. My people have studied your species extensively." The environmental system beeped again, and this time Elena was certain she caught the ghost of a smile before it vanished behind Lyraliai's composed facade. Those distinctive ears had definitely twitched, like a cat's tail when it was trying to pretend it wasn't interested in the laser pointer. As Elena began outlining the exchange protocols, she found herself studying the princess with growing fascination. Every gesture was precise, every word carefully chosen, but there were moments, fleeting as meteor flashes, when something else showed through. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe something more complex. When Elena demonstrated the data pad's holographic display, projecting a three-dimensional star map into the space above the table, she noticed how Lyraliai's violet eyes tracked the moving points of light with intense focus. The princess's questions were sharp, intelligent, and revealed a mind that 3 days of careful diplomatic maneuvering had turned the research station into something resembling a very polite minefield. Elena found herself measuring every step, every gesture, every casual reach for a coffee cup with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. Princess Lyraliai seemed to exist in a perpetual state of controlled observation, those distinctive ears tracking sounds that Elena couldn't even detect while maintaining a distance that suggested humans might be carrying some sort of contagious diplomatic plague. The morning briefing in the station's main laboratory had gone smoothly enough. Elena demonstrated the quantum resonance scanners while carefully maintaining a 3-foot buffer zone around the princess, who absorbed technical specifications with the intensity of someone downloading an entire database directly into her brain. Captain the Lauren and Scholar Vexia flanked their royal charge like particularly elegant bookends, occasionally exchanging glances that probably contained enough subtext to fill a small novel. It was during the afternoon cultural presentation that things began to deteriorate in spectacular fashion. The station's dining hall had been transformed for the occasion, which was to say that someone had hung colorful banners from the ceiling and convinced the food synthesizers to produce something that didn't look like it had been scraped off the bottom of a reactor core. The tables had been arranged in a configuration that Elena's diplomatic training assured her was both respectful and practical, though she suspected it looked more like a geometry lesson gone wrong. Elena stood before the assembled group, data pad in hand, prepared to demonstrate the finer points of human dining customs. She had practiced this presentation 3 times in her quarters, confident that explaining the use of eating utensils would be straightforward enough to avoid any diplomatic catastrophes. Human meal consumption involves several specialized tools, she began, lifting a fork with the reverence normally reserved for ancient artifacts. This implement allows for precise food manipulation while maintaining hygienic standards. Princess Lyralii watched with the focused attention of a xenobiologist studying a particularly fascinating new species. Her violet eyes tracked every movement as Elena demonstrated the proper grip, the appropriate angle, the delicate balance between efficiency and etiquette. The technique requires coordination between multiple appendages, Elena continued, picking up a knife to show the cutting motion. We use one tool to secure the food item while the other performs the separation process. Fascinating, Scholar Vexia murmured, her own ears tilting forward with scientific curiosity. Such an elaborate ritual for the simple act of consuming nutrition. Well, it's not exactly a ritual, Elena replied, feeling suddenly defensive about humanity's relationship with cutlery. It's more of a practical solution that evolved into cultural significance. She turned to the plate of synthesized protein that the kitchen staff had proudly announced was definitely edible and probably nutritious. The substance had been molded into geometric shapes that bore no resemblance to any food item from Earth's biological history, but Elena was determined to make this demonstration work. The key is to maintain proper control, she said, positioning the fork above a cube of what might have been some form of processed meat product. You secure the item, apply the cutting implement, and the cube of synthetic protein had apparently been designed by engineers who believed food should double as construction material. Elena's knife made contact with a resistance that suggested the substance might actually be some form of edible titanium alloy. She applied more pressure, the utensil slipped, and the cube launched itself across the table with the trajectory of a small missile. Time seemed to slow as Elena watched the projectile arc through the recycled air of the dining hall. Princess Lyralii, caught in mid-observation, had no time to react as the cube of synthetic nutrition made contact with her ceremonial robes with a wet splat that echoed through the suddenly silent room. The princess looked down at the stain spreading across the shimmering fabric, then up at Elena, then back down at the stain. Her ears had gone completely rigid, pointing straight up in what Elena was beginning to recognize as a sign of extreme emotional stress. For a moment that stretched like hyperspace between star systems, nobody moved. Captain Thalarin's hand drifted toward what might have been a weapon. Scholar Vexia's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. The environmental systems chose that exact moment to emit a cheerful beep that sounded remarkably like suppressed laughter. Princess Lyralii rose from her chair with such force that it toppled backward, clattering against the deck plating with a sound like thunder in the confined space. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of cold fury that could probably be detected by seismic sensors. Your species' lack of coordination is matched only by your inability to maintain proper boundaries. Elena stood frozen, fork still in hand, acutely aware that she had just committed what was probably the diplomatic equivalent of declaring war through interpretive dance. Your Highness, I am deeply sorry. That was completely accidental, and I... Accidental, Lyralii repeated, her tone suggesting that she found the concept of human accidents as believable as the existence of unicorns who spoke fluent quantum mechanics. Perhaps, Captain Lauren suggested with the diplomatic skill of someone defusing a photon torpedo, we could consider this an educational opportunity regarding human unpredictability. Elena caught something flickering across the princess's features, a momentary crack in the marble composure that might have been amusement before it was quickly suppressed. Those expressive ears twitched once, a movement so brief she almost missed it. "Of course," Elena said quickly, seizing the opportunity, "this is actually a perfect demonstration of why humans developed napkins. Would you like me to explain the cultural significance of stain removal? You propose to lecture me on cleaning procedures?" Princess Lyraliai's voice could have flash-frozen helium. "Well, not lecture exactly. More like collaborative problem-solving." Elena gestured helplessly with the fork, which she realized was still in her hand and probably not helping her case. "I mean, if we're going to be working together on these cultural exchanges, we should probably figure out how to handle the occasional protein incident." The environmental system beeped again, and this time Elena was certain she saw the ghost of a smile before it vanished behind the princess's diplomatic mask. "Very well," Lyraliai said with the tone of someone agreeing to defuse an antimatter bomb. "Demonstrate your human stain removal protocols." The next 20 minutes involved a surreal collaboration between species as Elena and Princess Lyraliai worked side by side at the dining hall's cleaning station. The princess maintained her rigid posture even while handling cleaning solutions, her movements precise and economical. Elena found herself explaining the molecular properties of various detergents while trying not to notice how Lyraliai's ears tracked every sound in the vicinity. "Human cleaning technology relies heavily on chemical reactions," Elena said, applying a sonic cleaner to the stained fabric. "We break down the molecular bonds of foreign substances and allow them to be absorbed into neutralizing agents." "Crude but effective," the princess observed, watching the stain fade under the device's influence. "Our methods involve restructuring matter at the quantum level, but this approach has its merits." "Quantum-level matter restructuring," Elena repeated. That's actually incredibly advanced. We're still trying to figure out how to make food that doesn't taste like recycled air." For just a moment, something that might have been genuine amusement flickered in Lyraliai's violet eyes. "Your synthetic proteins do possess a distinctive essence. Is that a diplomatic way of saying they taste terrible? I believe your human expression would be like cardboard soaked in regret." Elena burst out laughing before she could stop herself, and to her amazement, the corner of Princess Lyraliai's mouth twitched upward for a fraction of a second. They continued working in what Elena gradually realized was a much more comfortable silence than any they had previously shared. When their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same cleaning cloth, Lyraliai didn't immediately recoil. Instead, she paused, her fingers remaining in contact with Elena's for a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary. "Commander," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual Arctic edge, "I should clarify something about Etherian customs regarding physical contact." Elena felt her pulse quicken, hyper-aware of the warmth where their skin touched. "Of course, Your Highness. I want to understand. Among my people, unexpected touch is considered significant. It implies a level of intimacy that must be carefully negotiated between individuals." "I see," Elena said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. "So when I accidentally brushed against you earlier, you crossed a boundary that, in Etherian society, would typically require formal acknowledgement or—" Lyraliai's ears shifted slightly. "Consequences." The way she said the word "consequences" made Elena's breath catch. It wasn't quite a threat, wasn't quite a promise, but something far more complex that seemed to hang in the recycled air between them. "What kind of consequences?" Elena asked, surprised by her own boldness. Princess Lyraliai's gaze met hers directly for the first time since they had begun working together. In those violet depths, Elena saw something that had nothing to do with diplomatic protocol and everything to do with the kind of tension that made starship crews forget about regulations. That, the princess said softly, would depend entirely on the intentions behind the contact. Before Elena could formulate a response that wouldn't end her diplomatic career, the dining hall's doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Scholar Vexia entered, her expression carefully neutral but her ears positioned in what Elena was learning to recognize as barely contained curiosity. "Your Highness," Vexia said, "the evening's technical briefings are prepared for your review." The moment shattered like crystal in a gravitational field. Princess Lyralii stepped back, her diplomatic composure sliding back into place with practiced ease, but Elena caught the subtle reluctance in the movement. "Of course," Lyralii replied, her voice once again carrying its usual authority. "Commander Vasquez, I trust tomorrow's demonstrations will be conducted with greater precision." "Absolutely, Your Highness," Elena managed, still processing the implications of their conversation. "I'll make sure the food stays on the plates." As the Etherian delegation prepared to leave, Princess Lyralii paused at the dining hall's entrance. Without turning around, she spoke just loudly enough for Elena to hear. "Perhaps, Commander, some consequences are worth risking." After they left, Elena stood alone in the dining hall, cleaning cloth still in hand, wondering if she had just been threatened, propositioned, or invited to participate in some form of interstellar diplomatic dance that her training had definitely not covered. The environmental system emitted another cheerful beep, and Elena could have sworn it sounded approving. She looked down at the cleaning cloth, then up at the stars visible through the dining hall's viewport. Tomorrow's sessions were going to be very interesting indeed, assuming she could figure out how to navigate the space between diplomatic protocol and whatever was developing between her and a princess whose threats were beginning to sound remarkably like promises. The station hummed around her, processing air and recycling water and maintaining the delicate balance that kept them all alive in the vast emptiness of space. Somewhere in that mechanical symphony, Elena thought she could hear the sound of boundaries shifting, consequences approaching, and the universe getting ready to become a much more complicated place. The emergency klaxon's wail cut through Elena's dreams like a plasma cutter through butter, dragging her from visions of violet eyes and pointed ears into the harsh reality of flashing red lights and mechanical urgency. She rolled out of her bunk, feet hitting the cold deck plating as the station's AI began its cheerfully apocalyptic announcement. "Attention all personnel. We are experiencing a critical malfunction in primary life support systems. Oxygen levels are currently at 83% and falling. Please remain calm and have a pleasant day." Elena stared at the ceiling, wondering what kind of sadistic programmer had decided that imminent suffocation should be announced with the enthusiasm of a breakfast cereal commercial. She grabbed her emergency kit and raced toward the command center, her bare feet slapping against the deck plating in a rhythm that probably violated several noise ordinances. The corridors were filled with the controlled chaos of emergency protocols, technicians rushing between stations while the AI continued its relentlessly upbeat commentary on their collective doom. Elena rounded the corner to find Princess Lyralii standing in the main corridor, her ceremonial robes replaced by what appeared to be Etherian emergency gear that somehow managed to look both practical and elegant. "Commander," Lyralii said, her voice steady despite the flashing lights that painted her features in alternating shades of red and shadow. "I believe your station is attempting to kill us all." "Just another Tuesday in deep space," Elena replied, checking her portable scanner. "The good news is we have about 4 hours before things get really uncomfortable. The bad news is the malfunction appears to be in the sublevel maintenance tunnels." "Sublevel maintenance tunnels," the princess repeated with the tone of someone who had just been informed that the solution to their problems involved swimming through a reactor coolant system. Elena pulled up the station schematics on her scanner, the holographic display casting blue light across their faces. "The atmospheric processing units are accessible through service conduits beneath the main deck. It's going to be tight, cramped, and probably involve crawling through spaces that were designed by engineers who apparently believe humans were made of liquid." "Attention all personnel," the AI chirped with unwavering enthusiasm. "Oxygen levels now at 79%. Remember to breathe efficiently and maintain positive attitudes." "I'm going to reprogram that thing to sound depressed," Elena muttered, shouldering her tool kit. "At least then our impending doom would have appropriate emotional context." Princess Lyralii's ears twitched in what Elena was beginning to recognize as suppressed amusement. In Etherian society, we would consider such cheerful fatalism to be a form of psychological warfare. Well, we call it Tuesday. Come on, Your Highness. Time to get intimate with our life support systems. The access hatch to the maintenance tunnels was located in the station's lower level, behind a panel marked with warnings in 17 different languages. Elena keyed in her authorization code, and the hatch slid open to reveal a narrow shaft that disappeared into darkness like the throat of some mechanical beast. After you, Elena said, then immediately realized the diplomatic implications of asking royalty to crawl through a ventilation system first. Actually, maybe I should. Commander, Lyralii interrupted, her violet eyes meeting Elena's with something that might have been determination or possibly insanity. Lead the way. The maintenance tunnels were exactly as advertised, cramped, poorly lit, and designed by engineers who had clearly never met an actual human being. Elena squeezed through the opening, her shoulders scraping against metal surfaces that felt like they had been sandblasted with good intentions and poor planning. Behind her, she could hear Princess Lyralii navigating the narrow space with considerably more grace than should have been physically possible. Oxygen levels at 75% and falling, the AI announced cheerfully through speakers embedded in the tunnel walls. Don't forget to enjoy this unique opportunity for team building. Team building, Elena gasped, crawling through a section where the ceiling pressed down like it was trying to compress her into a more convenient shape. Next time I'm requesting hazard pay for diplomatic missions. Is hazard pay a common requirement for human diplomats? Lyralii asked from somewhere behind her, her voice slightly strained but maintaining its usual composure. Only the fun ones, Elena replied, pausing to check her scanner. We're getting close to the primary processing unit. Another 50 meters through this delightful tunnel of claustrophobia and we should reach the access junction. The tunnel branched ahead, splitting into 3 different directions like a mechanical choose-your-own-adventure novel. Elena consulted her scanner, trying to match the readings with the station schematics while simultaneously avoiding thoughts about how much oxygen they were consuming with each breath. Left tunnel leads to the water recycling systems, she announced. Middle tunnel goes to the atmospheric processors. Right tunnel, actually, I'm not sure what the right tunnel does. The schematics just say, miscellaneous systems. Miscellaneous systems, Princess Lyralii repeated. How reassuringly vague. Elena was about to respond when the tunnel shuddered around them, metal groaning with the sound of something important breaking in expensive ways. The lights flickered once, twice, then settled into a dim amber glow that made everything look like it was happening inside a bottle of ancient honey. That's not good, Elena said, which qualified as the understatement of the century. Attention all personnel, the AI chirped with undiminished enthusiasm. We have experienced a secondary malfunction in the environmental grid. Oxygen levels are now at 71%. Please remember that panic is counterproductive and keep those positive thoughts flowing. I'm definitely reprogramming that thing, Elena muttered, turning toward the middle tunnel. Right, let's get this done before we have to explain to our respective governments why their diplomatic representatives suffocated in a maintenance tunnel. The atmospheric processor access point was located at the end of a passage so narrow that Elena had to turn sideways to make progress. Behind her, she could hear Princess Lyralii navigating the space with what sounded like considerably less difficulty, which raised questions about Etherian physiology that Elena filed away for later consideration. Almost there, Elena announced, squeezing through a particularly tight section. The access panel should be just around this. The tunnel narrowed even further, compressing into a space that seemed designed for being substantially smaller than standard humans. Elena pushed forward, determined to reach the processor controls, when she realized she was stuck. Genuinely, completely, embarrassingly stuck. Commander? Princess Lyralii's voice carried a note of concern. Have you stopped moving for strategic reasons, or are you experiencing technical difficulties? Technical difficulties, Elena admitted, trying to suppress the rising panic that had nothing to do with decreasing oxygen levels and everything to do with being trapped in a metal tube while alien royalty waited behind her. I appear to be somewhat lodged. Lodged, the princess repeated. Stuck. Jammed. Experiencing involuntary architectural intimacy. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the distant hum of failing life support systems and the AI's continued cheerful updates on their impending doom. Oxygen levels at 68%, the speakers announced. Remember, teamwork makes the dream work. Commander, Princess Lyralii said, her voice closer now, I may be able to assist, but it would require physical contact, Elena finished, understanding immediately. The consequences thing. Yes. Elena closed her eyes, acutely aware of the metal walls pressing against her ribs and the woman behind her who represented both salvation and a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. Your Highness, I think we're past the point of worrying about protocol. Are we? There was something in Lyralii's voice that suggested this question carried implications far beyond their current predicament. Well, Elena said, trying to inject some levity into their increasingly dire situation, I'm trapped in a tube, you're the only person who can help me, and we're both going to suffocate if we don't figure this out. I'd say that meets the criteria for exceptional circumstances. She felt movement behind her, then the gentle pressure of hands against her shoulders. Princess Lyralii's touch was careful, precise, but Elena could sense the tension in those fingers as they found purchase points on her uniform jacket. On 3, Lyralii said. 1, 2. The princess pulled, Elena pushed, and for a moment they were locked in a mechanical embrace with the tunnel walls serving as an extremely unromantic chaperone. Then something gave way, and Elena popped free like a cork from a particularly stubborn bottle. She tumbled forward into the wider access chamber, landing in an undignified heap next to the atmospheric processor controls. Behind her, Princess Lyralii emerged from the tunnel with considerably more grace, though Elena noticed that her usually perfect composure showed signs of strain. Oxygen levels at 65%, the AI announced. Don't forget to breathe efficiently and maintain hope for the future. Elena scrambled to the control panel, her fingers flying over the interface as she ran diagnostic routines and system checks. The readings told a story of cascading failures and backup systems that had apparently decided to take an unscheduled vacation. The primary atmospheric scrubbers are offline, she announced, pulling up repair protocols. Secondary systems are operating at 30% efficiency. And the tertiary backups. She paused, staring at the readout, appear to be playing some kind of musical composition. Musical composition? Elena turned the audio pickup toward the speakers, and sure enough, the backup atmospheric systems were producing a series of mechanical tones that bore an unsettling resemblance to a waltz. That's actually not supposed to happen, Elena said, wondering if oxygen deprivation was causing hallucinations or if the station's AI had developed artistic ambitions. Princess Lyralii moved closer to examine the control panel, her proximity making Elena hyper-aware of the lingering effects of their tunnel adventure. The princess's usual composure had been replaced by something more immediate, more present, as if the emergency had stripped away layers of diplomatic protocol. These readings suggest the malfunction is not accidental, Lyralii observed, her violet eyes scanning the data streams. This pattern indicates a systematic test of emergency response protocols. Elena stared at the princess, then at the controls, then back at the princess. You're saying this whole thing is a drill? Attention all personnel, the AI announced with what now sounded like suspicious cheerfulness. Congratulations. You have successfully completed Emergency Response Scenario 7, Interspecies Cooperation Under Stress. Oxygen levels are returning to normal parameters. Please report to your designated stations for performance evaluation. The tunnel around them shuddered once more, then settled into the familiar hum of properly functioning life support systems. The emergency lighting switched back to normal illumination, and Elena could practically feel the atmospheric processors resuming their normal operation. Elena sat back on her heels, toolkit forgotten, staring at the control panel with the expression of someone who had just discovered that their dramatic near-death experience had been a surprise quiz. A test, she said slowly. The whole thing was a test. It would appear so, Princess Lyralii replied, though something in her voice suggested she wasn't entirely displeased with how they had performed. Elena looked at the princess, taking in her disheveled appearance, the way her ceremonial composure had been replaced by something more genuine and immediate. In the cramped space of the maintenance chamber, with the crisis resolved and normal systems humming around them, the silence stretched between them like a question waiting to be answered. "Your Highness," Elena said quietly, "about what just happened. The emergency response test. The other thing. The touching. The consequences." Princess Lyralii's ears shifted slightly, a movement Elena was learning to read like a complex language of gesture and implication. When the princess spoke, her voice carried none of its usual diplomatic distance. "I warned you about touching me, Commander. You did. I said there would be consequences. You did say that." Princess Lyralii moved closer, close enough that Elena could see the flecks of silver in her violet eyes, close enough to count the subtle variations in the length of those distinctive ears. "Perhaps," the princess said softly, "I have been too hasty in my warnings. Perhaps some consequences are worth the risk." The maintenance chamber hummed around them, life support systems working efficiently, emergency protocols satisfied, and two representatives of different species discovering that the space between threat and promise was sometimes smaller than the width of a maintenance tunnel. The main bay of Research Station Gamma-7 had been transformed into something that looked like a collision between a diplomatic summit and an interstellar yard sale. Human Federation banners hung alongside Etherian ceremonial tapestries that shifted colors with the ambient lighting, creating a visual effect that was either breathtakingly beautiful or mildly seizure-inducing, depending on your perspective. Elena stood at the edge of the chaos, watching technicians from both species attempt to coordinate a formal ceremony while speaking languages that had approximately 0 words in common. "Commander Vasquez," Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through her comm unit with the enthusiasm of someone who had been stuck in hyperspace for 3 weeks, "I trust everything is proceeding according to protocol." Elena glanced across the bay to where Princess Lyralii stood surrounded by what appeared to be half the Etherian nobility, all of whom managed to look elegant even while arguing about seating arrangements. The princess caught her eye and delivered what Elena had learned to recognize as the Etherian equivalent of a helpless shrug, a subtle movement of those expressive ears that somehow conveyed both resignation and amusement. "Absolutely, Admiral," Elena replied. "Everything is completely under control and definitely not resembling a cosmic diplomatic circus." "Excellent. The Federation Council is quite pleased with your progress reports. This trade agreement will secure humanity's access to some of the most advanced quantum technologies in known space." Elena nodded, watching as a human technician attempted to explain holographic projection systems to an Etherian engineer who kept trying to touch the light displays with the kind of scientific curiosity that suggested she was considering taking them apart to see how they worked. "Speaking of quantum technologies," Elena said, "I should mention that the Etherians have some pretty specific requirements about the mining operations on Kepler 442b. Something about the crystalline formations being connected to their cultural heritage." There was a pause that stretched across several light-years of space. "Cultural heritage, Commander. Apparently the crystals resonate with certain frequencies that are significant to their spiritual practices. We might need to adjust our extraction protocols to avoid disturbing the sacred sites." "Sacred sites," Admiral Morrison repeated with the tone of someone who had just been informed that the solution to their energy crisis involved tiptoeing around alien meditation gardens. "Don't worry, Admiral. I think we can work something out that benefits everyone." As Elena ended the communication, she noticed a disturbance near the main entrance. Prince Dorian had arrived with the full Etherian delegation, and he was making the kind of entrance that suggested he believed the universe existed primarily for his entertainment. He swept through the assembled crowd with the casual arrogance of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by reminding people of his royal status. "Sister," Prince Dorian announced, his voice carrying across the bay with the kind of projection that came from years of making dramatic speeches, "I see you have been fraternizing with the humans." Princess Lyralii's expression didn't change, but Elena noticed her ears shift into what had become recognizable as defensive positioning. Brother, I have been conducting diplomatic negotiations according to the Empire's interests. Have you? Prince Dorian's gaze swept across the assembled humans with the kind of disdain usually reserved for particularly unpleasant insects. And what exactly have these negotiations accomplished beyond teaching you to crawl through maintenance tunnels like a common engineer? Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. News traveled fast in diplomatic circles, apparently, and Prince Dorian had clearly been briefed on the previous day's emergency protocols. She started to move toward the royal siblings, but Princess Lyralii caught her eye and delivered the slightest shake of her head. The negotiations have been quite educational, Lyralii replied, her voice carrying the kind of diplomatic neutrality that could probably defuse photon torpedoes. I have learned much about human ingenuity and adaptability. Ingenuity, Prince Dorian repeated, his tone suggesting he found the concept as believable as the existence of quantum unicorns. Tell me, sister, what ingenuity is required to accidentally launch food across a dining table? A ripple of movement went through the assembled crowd as both human and Etherian observers suddenly found the ceiling decorations extremely fascinating. Elena felt her cheeks burn, aware that her culinary catastrophe had apparently become the stuff of interstellar legend. Perhaps, Princess Lyralii said quietly, you should focus on the purpose of this gathering rather than critiquing the social customs of our hosts. Oh, but I am focused, dear sister. I am focused on the fact that you appear to have forgotten the dignity befitting your station. The Empire sent you here to secure advantageous terms for our people, not to play in the dirt with creatures who can barely manage their own atmospheric systems. That was when Elena decided that diplomatic protocol could take a flying leap into the nearest black hole. Excuse me, Your Highness, she said, stepping forward with the kind of smile that could probably be classified as a weapon in certain jurisdictions, but I couldn't help overhearing your concerns about human competence. Prince Dorian turned toward her with the slow deliberation of a targeting computer acquiring a new threat. Ah, the infamous Commander Vasquez. I have heard so much about your unique approach to diplomacy. All good things, I hope, Elena replied, her smile growing wider and considerably more dangerous. Though I have to say, Your Highness, for someone who's so concerned about dignity and competence, you seem to have missed some fairly important details about what we've accomplished here. Have I indeed? Prince Dorian's voice could have frozen hydrogen. Elena gestured toward the holographic displays that showed the proposed trade agreements, mining protocols, and technological exchange programs. We've negotiated a framework that gives the Etherian Empire access to rare earth minerals while preserving your cultural sites. We've established joint research initiatives that will benefit both our species. And we've created the foundation for a partnership that could last for centuries. How remarkably thorough, the prince said, though his tone suggested he found Elena's achievements about as impressive as a particularly clever rock. But the really impressive part, Elena continued, her voice taking on the kind of cheerful menace that made experienced diplomats check their escape routes, is that we accomplished all of this while treating each other with respect, curiosity, and genuine interest in finding solutions that work for everyone. She paused, letting her words sink in while the assembled crowd watched with the fascination of people witnessing either a diplomatic breakthrough or a spectacular career-ending disaster. Your sister, Elena said, turning to address Prince Dorian directly, is one of the most intelligent, capable, and genuinely impressive individuals I've ever had the privilege to work with. She's navigated complex technical challenges, adapted to unfamiliar social customs, and maintained her composure even when faced with flying food and malfunctioning life support systems. Princess Lyralii's ears had gone completely still, her violet eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made the recycled air feel charged with electricity. So while you're standing there questioning her dignity, Elena continued, maybe you should consider the possibility that true dignity comes from rising to meet challenges, not from looking down on everyone else from some imaginary throne of superiority. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a weapon of mass awkwardness. Prince Dorian stared at Elena with the expression of someone who had just been lectured by a particularly articulate houseplant. The assembled crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see whether this would end in applause or executions. Then Princess Lyralii stepped forward. Commander Vasquez, she said, her voice carrying across the bay with absolute clarity, is correct. Prince Dorian's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound, which Elena figured was probably an improvement over his previous contributions to the conversation. Brother, Princess Lyralii continued, you speak of dignity as if it were something that could be diminished by association with others. But true dignity comes from recognizing worth wherever it exists, whether in the quantum laboratories of our homeworld or the maintenance tunnels of a human research station. She moved toward the ceremonial table where the trade agreements waited for formal ratification, her steps measured and deliberate. These negotiations have taught me that the universe is far larger and more complex than our empire's borders. There are wonders here, technological, cultural, and personal, that we cannot even begin to imagine if we remain trapped behind walls of assumed superiority. Elena watched as the princess reached the signing table, aware that they had moved far beyond simple trade negotiations into territory that would reshape the relationship between their species. Your Highness, Elena said, following her to the table, there's one more thing we should address before we make this official. Princess Lyralii turned toward her, eyebrows raised in question. Elena extended her hand, palm up, in the traditional Etherean gesture of respect that she had been secretly practicing for weeks. I believe it's customary to confirm agreements with appropriate ceremonial contact. The princess stared at Elena's outstretched hand, then up at her face, then back at the hand. Around them, the assembled crowd held its breath as if witnessing the first contact between species all over again. Commander, Princess Lyralii said softly, are you certain you understand the implications of that gesture? I understand that some boundaries are meant to be crossed, Elena replied. I understand that real diplomacy happens in the space between different worlds. And I understand that the best consequences are the ones we choose together. Princess Lyralii's ears shifted forward, a movement Elena had learned to associate with decisions being made and protocols being quietly abandoned. When the princess spoke, her voice carried a warmth that had been carefully hidden behind weeks of diplomatic formality. Touch me again, human, she said, deliberately echoing her first threat while her eyes sparkled with something that definitely wasn't anger, and you'll suffer the consequences of making this universe a much smaller, more connected place. Their hands met in the space above the signing table, human fingers intertwining with graceful Etherean digits while two species watched the formal beginning of something that would change the shape of known space. Elena felt the warmth of skin against skin, the subtle texture differences that spoke of different evolutionary paths, and the unmistakable rightness of a connection that transcended the boundaries of biology and politics. Well, Prince Dorian said into the charged silence, I suppose stranger things have happened in the history of diplomatic relations. Elena looked up at him, surprised to see something that might have been approval in his expression. Though I still maintain, he added with what might have been the ghost of a smile, that human food-flinging techniques could use considerable improvement. Princess Lyralii laughed, a sound like crystalline bells caught in a solar wind, and Elena realized that this was what real diplomacy looked like. Not the careful protocols and formal procedures, but the moment when people chose to see past their differences and build something new together. As they signed the trade agreements and posed for holographic recordings that would be transmitted across dozens of star systems, Elena found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. She had started as a career diplomat following established protocols, but somewhere between flying food and emergency crawlspaces, she had discovered that the most important negotiations happened in the spaces between rules. The universe was indeed becoming a smaller, more connected place, and Elena couldn't think of anywhere else she'd rather be than right here, hand in hand with an alien princess whose threats had turned into promises and whose consequences had become the foundation for a future neither of their species could have imagined alone. The environmental systems hummed around them, processing air and recycling hope and maintaining the delicate balance that kept dreams alive in the vast emptiness of space.